Welcome to this 88th webinar in our series Leading Through the Pandemic. Hope all of you are doing very well. I'm here to remind you once again about pitching session we have on 31st of May. We are inviting entries for deep tech retail startups with their proposition to be presented. If you're selected, please note it that you will be pitching to a team of 6 investors here on 31st of May at the same platform. And stand a chance to just not get mentored by the industry practitioners, but also get seed funded. Last date for these entries are 26th of May. And please visit our website, 100watt.tech, or our LinkedIn page at this place. And you will see where on the chat box, we will put the link right now to apply. Note down that link, copy that link and keep it with you. And follow the link at the screen also will be available on you. Now I hand over to my colleague Bhavesh to conduct the session today. And Bhavesh has got 3 exciting data scientists with him to take us through this exciting session. Over to you, Bhavesh.
Thank you, Ajay. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks once again to Ty for helping us organize this session. It's the 8th in the series. And I appreciate everybody logging in on a Sunday afternoon, early afternoon. Very excited to welcome my panelists today, Shantanu Bhattacharya. Shantanu is the Chief Data Scientist at Airtel, somebody I've known for the last 10, 15 years now. Shantanu, thank you for coming onto the show and talking to everyone. Shantanu is actually a real rocket scientist. Okay, he worked with NASA for many years. He has a PhD in astrophysics. Worked on the Saturn mission at NASA. My second panelist is a gentleman by the name of Rajas Lonkar. Rajas is a Carnegie Mellon alum and is also a data scientist, but not a rocket scientist. Rajas worked as a data scientist both with IBM and with Google in the Bay Area. Welcome, Rajas. My third and the final panelist is a gentleman by the name of Srinivas Ron. He prefers being called Ron, and he's been a data scientist. He's has a degree in operations research, which is very, as you all know, is very math-oriented from Columbia University. And he's currently head of data science and analytics at PharmEasy, one of India's most prominent pharma retail companies. And before this, he worked at Jabong. So pleasure and welcome everyone, gentlemen. So, if you look at, there's a lot of hype about AI, right? And especially in the retail sector, people are talking about very interesting use cases, a lot of edge use cases combining with IoT coming up. People are doing very interesting things around price optimization. They're talking about hyper-personalization of, offers, micro-targeting, conversational AI. So, there are a lot of use cases. But so coming to you, Srinivas, as somebody who, is implementing it for a end retailer, what are some of the initiatives you are currently taking and where do you see this whole AI in retail market?
Yeah, well, so currently I'm with a health tech company, right? And first of all, thanks for having me on this, right? So I'm currently with a health tech company, and as you know, health is a very personal thing, right? So we obviously want to make sure that each of our customers' journeys are very unique. So in terms of how we use personalization and AI to deliver that is right from how we reach out to our customers in terms of the inbound traffic, right? Who do we reach out to? What kind of customers the platform makes sense for what kind of customers, and who we should have more of during their entire search and browse experience on the platform, their selection, how do they discover offers and discounts, and they are able to choose the most relevant fulfillment experience for them, and also in terms of the post-order experience as well, right? In terms of, for example, in the e-pharmacy business, we need, once the order is, we have the order, we need to confirm with the customer about their prescription and things like that. Now different customers prefer different times of being called. How do we basically learn about that and make sure that whenever we reach to the customer, it's not irritating both for the customer as well as it's a drain on the resources, right? So many things along the funnel, from traffic to conversion to the post order experience, and how do we make them actually come back to the platform over and over again. We actually embed personalization in each one of those. Of course, it's a journey. No platform is truly n equal to one personalized. So we start from personalizing for our broad segments, and then go deeper into actually making it very personal for each and every individual who's experiencing the platform.
Right.
Srinivas, for just future, if you can keep your video off while you are speaking, it keeps on lagging a lot. Your voice is also breaking.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So Srinivas, very interesting, how you look at the whole conversion rate optimization. So Shantanu, coming to you, to some extent, you are also a retailer, right? I mean, you are in the business of retailing minutes and data. Talk about, what have been your challenges because you have a large customer base. So doing personalization, how to prioritize the magnitude of that completely changes with a brand like Airtel.
Absolutely. So, Bhavish, I was just wondering, thank you for inviting me. And I was just wondering why I'm here until I realized that I'm one of country's biggest retailers. We have Airtel stores everywhere. There are 300,000 other stores, the mobile stores, where you actually have people sitting in and selling you SIM cards and so on, right? If you look at it, if you think of it, that being also our footprint, we have over 300,000 stores in which we have our footprints, which makes it one of country's biggest retailers, right? So think about the 3 or 4 buckets where we sort of use AI, right? One is just understanding our customer base and sort of managing what I'd call is the customer acquisition, right? In people, telecom is essentially, as you said, the retail business of buying minutes and increasingly the buying the voice time, the data time. Now, understanding the customer segmentation, what people want, what people know, and how do they make that decisioning process is actually a fascinating subject. So I used to work for Facebook, ran emerging market products. Back then, we had a word saying that your phone is an entry to your heart. The moment you have a phone and you are logging in and you are making your sort of, making any kind of customer login, if you are really smart, you can suck in about 70 different pieces of information off the phone, make, brand, etc., etc. And you can actually make a pretty good characteristics of who you are. You combine that phone and the location information and everything that you know about the brand, the price of the phone, the what else, other apps you have, and so on. So now you got a pretty strong customer characteristics, which essentially helps you building. So for example, if I know your phone is a 20,000 rupees phone, heavy data user in South Delhi, right? My first offer to you would be a 299, with 2 gig data per day, right? As opposed to if your phone is a, low-end Android, for, 5,000 entry-level Android, in rural areas near Gaya or Bihar, or Patna in Bihar, then I'll offer you a very different kind of products to begin with, right? So take that, right? The second bucket of it is essentially figuring out all about yourself. Because of our scale, which is 300 million plus customers, we collect, and you have to sort of really drop your jaw at this point, we collect 100 billion customer records per day. 3 to 400 billion other network records, which sort of tells you what kind of experience you're having. So about 500 billion records per day, and we can pretty much figure out as much as I want to. A lot of times we are limited by compute, then are limited by ability to collect the data. At any given day, on average, a smartphone is collecting in the smartphone ecosystem, not including the Facebook and the Googles, it's collecting about 1,200 data points from you, right? So you can do a lot of understanding of what sort of engages you, what makes you happy, what makes you unhappy, and sort of prevent the churn. But, or sort of do the upsell and cross-sell. Third bucket is where the most interesting part comes. we get about or post-COVID days, we used to get about 1.4 million calls per day to our call center. Now, this is, so we went through actually a bunch of failures to understand the customer. So we initially built a chatbot which didn't get more than 100,000, never got 100,000. In a peak they would get about 30,000-40,000 conversations. And our initial hypothesis was that once you build a chatbot, everyone would sort of move there. The reason no one moved there is because people like you and I who know what a chatbot and can converse on a chatbot will do self-service anyway, right? But the guy who is sitting in a pancha shop near Muzaffarpur and bought a 35 rupees recharge and has a 28 rupees 25 paisa talk time is the guy who will call the call center saying that bhaiya mune 35 rupiya ka recharge kiya lekin 28 rupiya ka talk time. He'll wait for 45 minutes. The call center guy is incentivized because the 8 rupees is GST and the dealer commission and all. The call center guy gets paid by the fact that you're not going to give him anything else, right? That's 28 rupees. He spent 30 minutes going through that conversation. In that process, he has spent 180 rupees of company's money to prevent 8 rupees of giving 8 rupees to the customer, right? So building what I call the India class conversational AI engine is one of our highest priorities. And it's probably one of the most fascinating tasks I have ever undertaken in my entire life, 25 years in the science. Tons of challenges. In India, you have, even in the US, you're calling customer support. You're calling from an air-conditioned room. Even if you're standing on the road and calling, unless it's New York City, it's quiet. Here, if you are in a pancha shop in Muzaffarpur, there are cars passing by you. There's an auto honking. There's a guy who is conversing, standing next to you with someone else. There's a child crying. There's a goat bleating, and there's huge amount of ambient noise. The noise essentially overcrowds the signal at sometimes. Right? Second thing is our language. We all speak. I'm a Bengali. In my Bengali conversation, I'll speak Bengali, English, and Hindi interchangeably. Like English and so on is rather common. That's sort of the language mix mode. Third one is even more interesting, which is the accent. The Bengali trying to speak in Hindi, a Gujarati speaking in Hindi, and the Tamil speaking in Hindi, and Haryanvi speaking in Hindi, like 4 dialects, right? You could build one engine that would not work. So these are some really fascinating sort of data science challenges we are working as a retailer, of course, as a very different kind of retailer that we are undertaking. And the last bit is that in the post-COVID world, all our hypotheses, the way the business was built, has taken not a 360-degree turn, but almost a 180-degree turn. We are revamping a bunch of our what I call as the digitization efforts we had taken. We're essentially scrapping it midway through and rethinking the business. So for example, one challenge that all retailers have in a social distancing world where you have to stand 6 feet apart, how do you conduct business that's experience-based? So if you're a retailer, if you're Neiman Marcus, which unfortunately has filed for bankruptcy day for yesterday, where the person, if you're buying $1,000 suit or a $2,000 Bruno Mogli shoe in Bruno Mogli store, how does the salesperson stand 6 feet apart from you and give you any wearing a mask, and if the whole experiential aspect is gone?
Yeah.
So some of the post-COVID challenges are turning out to be even bigger challenges that you have encountered, because all the hypotheses that our previous challenges are built on or previous solutions are built on are thrown out of the door today.
Yeah, so Shantanu, very interesting. I'm going to hold you to that, some of those thoughts, and come back to you when we discuss the India-specific challenges. So Rajesh, you worked in data science in the US, right? I mean, and you and I have talked about it many times. When you came to India and you started building a product for the retailers on the very math-intensive optimization problems you were solving, what has been your experience with the Indian retailers? What do you think they're doing well? Are there things where they're ahead of the US retailers? Are there practices where they're behind some of the US retailers? Any comments, thoughts based on your experiences?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. So my experience has been generally on the positive side. So from the one place where Indian retailers differ a lot from US retailers is the scale of the challenge. Like when we talk about US retailers, they're talking about like several hundreds of thousands of SKUs across like 200, 300,000 different stores. And not 200, 300,000, but 3,000 stores. So, like the scale that they deal with is at a different level completely. Whereas in India, we are just getting started. Earlier it was all unorganized retail too. Even now, it's dominated by unorganized retail. And to use data science or machine learning or any of that sort in unorganized retail is next to impossible, because the costs don't justify how much money has to be spent in order to bring those products to them. But that said, with when we talk about PharmEasy, or when we talk about Star Bazaar, or any of these big chain retailers who are now making inroads within like the smaller towns, not just cities, but smaller towns and villages and stuff like that, I think that is where the scale is kind of being met now. But the challenge now is of a different kind when we talk about Indian retailers, and that actually kind of resonates very well with what Shantanu was saying. Like US is a big, large market, so volume and velocity of the data is big, but the difference is variety. The variety over there, the habits of the entire market is very, very homogeneous. Whereas when you talk about India, the preferences of customers in terms of brand, pricing, the languages in which these experiences need to be offered to customers. So the variety of data and challenges that we have to deal with when it comes to Indian retailers, that's at a completely different scale. In fact, it's actually much more, challenging. These are much bigger challenges that Indian retailers face as compared to US retailers. So that's the place where I think Indian retailers are doing really, really well. So on the standard, like volume and velocity kind of problems, yes, they are kind of falling, behind in terms of, US retailers, and kind of catching up. But whereas when it comes to dealing with variety and variety of the problems and, data that they have to deal with, they are, I think, probably one step ahead of what things are in the US at this point.
Okay, yeah, interesting. So Shantanu, coming to you, very easy to hire people like you, very accomplished data scientists, get you an office, throw in some people. But how is business? How critical is executive sponsorship for some of these AI use cases? And how have you gone about selling it internally to your stakeholders and to CEO of various telecom regions or lines of businesses? So any thoughts, best practices you have done which could benefit our audience? Shantanu? So Srinivas, I take the question to you. What have been some of your challenges trying to incorporate analytics in a day-to-day basis, within your functions, business functions?
Yeah, I think we just, a brief while ago, we were talking about variety and diversity and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, which I have experienced is that I think for a while, everyone wants to look at the numbers, at reports, dashboards, and make basically, when I talk about leadership, right? So they would like to, look and stare at the numbers and then make their own intuitive decisions around businesses. And then for a while that is good. But just when this diversity and just the variety of signals that we as a business you start capturing, in particularly in the mobile first business, it becomes humanly impossible for anyone to actually look at all those signals together and then make sense out of it and still make really optimal decisions, right? And this is something that the leadership sooner or later realizes that if they want to maintain the growth momentum, or if they want to bring down cost disproportionately, it's not humanly possible for them to just look at a bunch of metrics and charts and make those decisions very optimally. I think that right around that time, that inflection time is when typically companies start making investments in data science. And at that point in time, I think there is a lot of appreciation already for the fact that human mind will not be able to look at mere numbers and make decisions, and so that process becomes a little easier. As data scientists, what we need to do is help the leadership. It's a lot about education. we need to help, make the point that basically, if here's a problem and here's a solution, and how does this solution actually lead to solving the problem, right? A lot of times what happens is, I think the data scientists focus more on the problem solving and less on actually explaining how that solution would translate into actually solving the business problem that the leadership is looking to solve, right? So as long as the data scientists are making that translation very simple and understandable for the leadership, the challenge is very easily overcome. And obviously, one other thing that I have done is keep telling your leadership that, hey, what you're investing is really an experiment, right? So we do this experiment. We try to make sure that the cost of the experiment is as low as possible. So we experiment with a very small bunch of, say, customers or use case, part of the problem, and try to show the value in that particular segment, and then they really get the confidence to scale it up, to a much larger section.
Right. So good takeaways. Dashboarding and scorecards are still probably relevant, even with newer analytical techniques like in AI. And experimenting is and doing small pilots is a very welcome step. So Shantanu, coming back to you, what has been some of the best practices you have implemented with your business users?
In terms of implementing the data science practices?
Yeah.
So a couple of things, right? So the data science at Airtel is actually pretty nascent. I've been here just about 2 years. It takes in any organization that has not had a large scale data science presence, takes about a good 6 months to understand, sort of, go and talk to the stakeholders, understand what they do today versus how the future looks like, sort of get the buy-in. Then it takes a little bit time to go hire people and then sort of start with your first set of test cases, right? So 3 or 4 sort of, the way to do that is when you start in any organization, you sort of start at 2 ends. You don't take the middle path. The first end is essentially simpler problems that have immediate impact. So for example, when I worked at another company after coming back to India was delivery, right? The first thing we looked at was one of the simple problems, which is cash lost from the CFO's office, right? Which is because there are a lot of CODs, a lot of cash sort of gets lost after the person delivers. Not a very complex rocket science data science. It was essentially finding out a combination of people who had the money is getting lost. But the impact of that was very immediate. You could implement the solution immediately and sort of see a cash flow impact, right? So we looked at both the spectrums. One is look at your standard businesses of figuring out how to look at the churn, and then the most complex part of how to sort of build and expand your network, right? So in both of the spectrum, we have been successful. So some of the things that I'll talk about is actually very fascinating. Let's look at the network rollout. If you recall, in the past, I would say year or so, about a year back, everyone was complaining about the network situation, right? And it didn't matter whether it was Airtel, Voda, or Jio, or anyone else. And since then, things have improved, I would say, significantly. And the fact that country went from, on our network, from 65 petabytes of consumption a day to about 100 petabytes a day in a matter of 5 weeks, and things didn't blow up, is actually a testimony of the fact that we just, if you look at this one service that stood up in the country was the telco service, right? And that is a testimony of the fact that the network rollout that had happened in the past year or so was actually done in the right place at the right time, at the right capacity, right? So the way it used to be done, and let's just go a little bit detail on this. What would happen? So for example, Eastern UP, a rural area, right? Typically the way it happened, the TSM, the territory sales manager or zonal sales manager will come and say, look, this area, these are the sort of villages that are not covered by our tower. If you go and make a tower, we'll make money, right? And all of that will be consolidated in a manual process. It will sort of get the flow on the top. There'll be some, given, back and forth discussion, and we will allocate, whatever the capital is needed. By the way, in terms of the amount of capital we used to deploy, I cannot give you the exact number. This is pre-2017. Our capex was as big as India Army's capex every year, right? It's that big. The network equipment in this country is a massive spend, right? It's gone down quite a bit because of the pricing changes and all. But so it was a largely manual process with some intuition, some data, census data, etc., etc. Challenge in rural India is that the quality of data is extremely poor, right? I mean, you have some states like Karnataka has actually made decent progress in capturing rural data. Most states, most states have not. So we started looking at a proxy of things like electoral data, how many people vote, how many people live there, all of that. Problem is that even that's a wrong data. So if you think of Eastern UP, your census will tell you 6,000 people live in that village. Your voter list will tell you 4,000 people voted, which sort of will be matched with each other because about 70% of the population is usually on the voter list. The very young are not, and so on, right? Problem is that during the non-election time, most of the part of Eastern UP, the male are actually working in Bangalore, Delhi, and other places. They have the 4G handsets that's latching onto a tower in Bangalore, and the older people and women who are left behind, they usually have a 20 rupees recharge, a candy bar, Nokia CX5 phone, and they are not making calls, right? So on the basis of data that you have, you make a projection. Your projection is, correct, and it's absolutely wrong, right? So how do you figure out these dynamics, which I call as the India class problem, right? So we actually looked at a couple of fascinating stuff. We looked at, for example, Google satellite data. So if the village has a canal going next to it, it's probably likely a prosperous. If the canal has water, it's likely to be more prosperous. And then we found out through deep learning, if the proportion of rectangular buildings are higher in an area, they tend to be more prosperous. It took us a long while to figure out, but then it turned out the reason, because it's deep learning, sometimes the feedback you get, you don't understand. Turned out the signs of prosperity in rural areas, the schools, colleges, markets, warehouses are all longish buildings. So the moment you see more proportion of those buildings, that means the area is relatively prosperous, right? We looked at NASA's nighttime illumination data. So if you go from Mumbai to Pune, right, outside Panvel, you'll see these big buildings built by Godrej, 30-story building, 1.4 crore, 3-bedroom apartment, and everything is sold. So you'll think that if I put a tower there, it'll make money right away. You look at the nighttime illumination data, and that building is a ghostly building, right? Because our TSMs and the ESMs, when they're during the daytime, they look at the building, they look at the security guards, they look at some people, they say, okay, this building has people, right? So all of these signals that we are sort of getting, so what used to take, for example, months in order to decide whether their site is profitable or not, now you can scan that data every night from Google Maps, illumination data, and whatever more data feeds are coming. I can run it on a half a dozen GPUs, run it for 7-8 hours, and if required, I can generate a new prediction every day. You don't do it because it's not required. I mean, you don't make financial decisions every single day of your life. But these are some of the fascinating things we did in India. So 2 lessons that I learned from India, right? 3 lessons actually. If you want to build anything, what I call as an India class data science, you need to remember 3 things, right? One, the first thing is that what we learned in the West. So I spent 27 years in the US, worked for both AOL, ran their data platforms, and Facebook. Whatever you learned in the West, that solution is highly likely to be wrong. In fact, if it comes to you intuitively after living in the West for 25 years, discard that it's almost going to be surely wrong, right? So don't start that. So that's lesson 1. The lesson 2 is the India class data problems. The data has 3 characteristics: incomplete, incorrect, and incomprehensible, and very often all 3 of them, right? The third thing is that the massive scale, right? Anything you do here, Airtel is 300 million. That's like as much as the US population. So the scale is massive.
Yes.
And the last thing is, last but not least, the customer behavior is very, very immature. I can build a model saying that if these are the 3 things I do, of the digital recharge on Airtel payment back will go up by 4%. It starts going up until a rival gives you a 10 rupees cashback on a 50 rupees recharge, and there goes my entire data science model, right? And in India, you can invalidate every single data science model by giving a 10 rupee cashback. Or 50 rupee cashback, right? So these are some of the fascinating lessons I've learned sitting in the country in the past, 2-3 years.
Yeah, very interesting.
India is a different zoo altogether.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. So, Rajesh, what has been your learnings? You've been working, you've worked on both the sides of the continent like Shantanu. What are some of the data quality issues or challenges you are seeing, maybe with respect to adoption also?
Well, I guess when I was saying about the variety problem, like a part of it is not having, very reliable data sources.
Yes.
When it comes to even the demographic data, like one of the first places that you need to start when you talk about personalization and stuff like that is getting reliable data on who lives where, what are the general characteristics of the customers living in a particular area, especially when we talk about retail. There's not enough data which tells us who exactly lives there, what their income levels are, and things like that. It's there, but it's sparse and the quality is not good, and then it's not updated at a frequent basis. And development happens very rapidly, and some of these data sources go out of, they become accurate really, really fast. So data quality issues is something that is a very, very big challenge when it comes to Indian market. In the US, you have a lot more stability in terms of, there are lots of external vendors. When we talk about health tech, for example, there are anonymized data sets that give you, patient history over time. So there's some unique identifier. You don't know who this patient is, but you know the gender, their approximate age bucket that they are in, and exactly which doctors did they go to, and which medicines did they take? Did the dosage did it go up? Did it go down? Did they move to a different doctor? So you can derive a lot of information from all of this. This is all anonymized, but it's available for you to actually build your data, and that's all you need in order to build your models on, right? This level of sophistication in terms of data capturing and actually translating into insights is still not all that mature in India. We are getting there. We are building, and then we have to rely on all these creative, methods like, analyzing satellite imagery data and stuff in order to actually make sense of it. Another place where I think the very big difference lies in that the information that is captured through social media, especially in the US, all the more developed economies, you get a lot of real-time signals on whether people are liking what your products or not. In India, it's not that, as compared to the entire population. Maybe there's one section of your users who are actually active on social media talking about their products, your experiences, whether when they bought something on your platform, did they like it or did they not like it. But there's a huge population who's simply inactive on social media. So so it's not just the quality of the data that we're talking about, it's the completeness. Even if you get that data, do you rely on that data? Can you rely on the data to make your decisions? Because there are higher chances that it's more biased than not. So I think we have to deal. So we have to deal with a lot. We have to actually triangulate data from a lot of different sources. We cannot blindly trust data that is coming out of social media. You have to run your survey panels. You have to do on ground research in order to, and then satellite data and triangulate data from multiple sources, put it all together, and then try to build a more comprehensive picture of what your customers are, who your customers are, what their buying preferences are, and make decisions based on that. That involves a lot more work. That makes putting to the challenge of putting together all of these things, various data sources in a more coherent data warehouse. That is that creating that 360-degree view profile of each customer that we talk about. That is immensely more challenging when it comes to India.
Right. So interesting challenges. So what about ethics and privacy? Issues. We've seen, especially with the social distancing norms coming in, and the whole controversy surrounding the Rogya Setu app. So this is a question to all the panelists. Rajesh, let's start with you. What kind of steps are you taking to maintain privacy and security of some of the customers?
So first of all, the data that we deal with on our side for this company that we are dealing with, it doesn't involve a lot of customer level data. So that actually helps us to work at an aggregate level. So and that itself is a strategy. Rather than working at customer level data, first thing is you have to work with a slightly higher level aggregates and make sure that you don't end up abusing the customer level, the data at the customer that you have captured.
You do have access to data. It's just that you've chosen to work at an aggregate level.
Yes, exactly. But that is something that even companies can make the decision in-house. Right. The other part of it is, this is a learning that comes from my previous companies, that even if that data is captured at the customer level, that data, even for data analysts, that data should be exposed to people only on a need basis, So the only people in the company who need that customer level data, who know what the name of the customer is, what the contact name of the customer is, what gender does that customer identify by, what the age is, and all of those things, that is only required by customer support people or somebody who's actually debugging something, or like debug folks, right?
Yeah.
Whereas all the data scientists can work with obfuscated data sets, So like whenever you expose that data for any kind of modeling purposes, you have to make sure that you are working with obfuscated data sets. That's a given. That is the starting point. The second is, just because you have the capability to do it based on the data that you've captured, does that really mean that you should be doing it? Like, for example, just stepping back from retail use cases a little bit, when we talk about HR challenges, for example, like, okay, that the candidate who has applied for a job, the gender, the age, but is that information really relevant for you to make a decision, like in your screening decisions, whether this person should be interviewed or not interviewed, right? So all of those things, if that data set, even if you have that data, you should not be capturing it and showing it to people who can make biased decisions based on
that. That's an interesting, Shantanu, you want to take off from there? What kind of checks and balances you are keeping, in spite of having 300 million, which is greater than the population of the US, frankly, right? Your customer base. Yeah. It's a very interesting challenge. And, obviously it impacts model performance, right? Not having very granular data. So how do you balance that performance versus privacy?
Cool. So what I'll talk about is that, let's talk about a couple of aspects of it. And you hit on a subject that's essentially my area of research also. So a couple of ways you can do that, right? So one, remember, we are a highly, highly regulated industry. So our access to what data I can see is regulated by the industry, and we sort of abide by the industry norms and even more. I have in my past life in 2 other companies in the US have seen the head of the data sciences and the CTOs had to leave the company because while they were well-meaning, they had accidentally released the data for researchers who New York Times made a big story out of it, and both of them had to leave and all that wonderful stuff. So we essentially followed the privacy norms that are set by the government to its not to its letters, also to its spirit. Having said that, I'll tell you what's important, right? Most of the data science problem that exists in the country today can be done on aggregated, can be solved using aggregated data. You really don't need to, the delta between where there's no model versus the hyper-personalized model, that gap is largely covered by your sort of anonymized aggregated data. You really don't need to get to the top of the top, right? We haven't come anywhere near the US level of perfection there yet. And even if you build something like that, as I said earlier today, right, the cashback can invalidate all your models. So you're sort of, even in your application, if you think of data science, right, there are 3 aspects that people don't realize. So one is your model. Second, your ability to execute on that model. So for example, think of international roaming, right? I can today build a model where I'll say Bhavish will travel next month to Europe with a 79% chance, right? If you're now going to send out an SMS that said traveling abroad, get 3999, that whole model, utility of that is 0 because you're still sending out a very broad model to everyone in your database, right? And then the third one is the offer, right? Which is, what is the offer? A customer is always looking for offers. Unless you get all 3 funnels right? The data science models are often not sort of, data science models by them being perfect and individually tuned doesn't make sense, right? So that's first. Second thing, whenever there is a technology challenge, one of the funny things that always happens is the technology itself goes and says, that's a challenge, let's go find a solution. So a couple of technologies that have come out of MIT in the past few years, MIT and Google largely, federated learning combined with homomorphic encryption will take care of a lot of the challenges you talk about. So for example, think of a recommendation engine on your phone. You're watching a movie and it's a restaurant recommendation engine, and you are trying to figure out what kind of restaurants you want to go to. Previously, what would happen? You would suck in all the data from all users and try to build a grand model. Today, the phone that I have, it's a Galaxy S9 Plus, which is 2 years old phone, has an AI chip. It can run TensorFlow inside. So I can take a grand model that runs in the center. I can federate a tiny part of that model. It runs locally on my computer, gives me the recommendations. all it passes instead of data are the model parameters and weights, right? And using a technological homomorphic encryption, which doesn't say that the model parameter and the weights are from Ravish or Shantanu. It says user 1, user 2. It cannot be backtracked. And the recommendations that it gives is actually much more hyper-tuned to Ravish or Shantanu, right? So essentially what you're doing, instead of putting the models in the center and sucking all the data, you're doing the compute on the edge and just taking parts of the information that's needed, inferencing that's needed for improving your model. In fact, one of the things that everyone can play today, take your phone. If it is something that has a Google keyboard is federated. Type the word I am, right? And then keep hitting the center recommendation, right? It gives you 3 recommendations, keep hitting it. And if you have been using the keyboard for a while, it will actually give you a very good view of what your life is. If I do it today, it actually says, last time I did it, is I'm going to flight today to Bangalore and going to call Professor Ramesh Raskar of MIT tonight. So when I was doing it, Ramesh was the speaker. Ramesh said, Shantanu, your life is induced to taking flights to Bangalore and calling me at night at MIT. It is hideously accurate of what our life is, and that's because it's highly federated. You don't tell that to you. So some of the technologies that you're seeing today are changing everything. In 3 years from now, a lot of the discussions that you're having today around privacy won't exist. A new set of problems will definitely exist, but the current set of problems will go away because the technology is already being developed and rapidly progressing.
Yeah. So I think this whole federated machine learning is a very interesting thing. But so coming back to you and Rajas again, Rajas, do you think data scientists AutoML will eventually replace data scientists? Although I know there is a lot of hype, but those people don't realize that a lot of the use cases they talk about are actually not really practical in a production kind of a scenario. Do you see all 3 of you, your jobs getting redundant because of AutoML?
I think the level will the level at which we operate will change. AutoML will take care of certain things. It is like it was saying. It's about the nature of the job will change. The data scientists will not go away for sure. But the job of data scientists will be reduced from actually analyzing data, writing queries, and building models. It will be the job of them will be actually more of storytellers, trying to make sense of it. Gathering insights from different from what AutoML is producing, and tie it into a more coherent business narrative, so that people can actually make sense of it. And so the creative thinking part, the strategizing around what insights you get, is what. So those higher cognitive functions is what will take more of our time. And of course, when we talk about storytelling and everything, that's about like socializing the data, making sure and all of this, so social and higher cognitive, functions will take a larger portion of our time with advent of AI and machine.
So Rajesh, those are great points, right? And if you look at some of the recent advances in explainable AI, natural language processing, language generation, a lot of those tools now can actually, do auto suggest visualization. They can do. You don't need an ETL. So a lot of those things are becoming very sophisticated, right? So Shantanu, coming to you, I'll come back to you in a minute. But Srinivas, I want to ask you, what has been some of the challenges or capabilities your business guys are asking you? Are they asking for these kind of explainable AI kind of capabilities? How are they consuming some of the analytics which your team is generating?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? So there are obviously problem statements where explainable AI is what is required, right? And in certain cases, it's not, right? For example, one of the use cases that we have, and where we are also working with Fountain9, is around forecasting, right? So we sell around 100,000 different medicines in any given month, and so each one has its own demand pattern, and we would like to capture that, and we would like to actually forecast that, because we also see that our customers have most of our customers are chronic, from the chronic segment, right? So they do consume the same set of medicines regularly, and they keep coming back to us to order those, right? So there is some bit of certainty in what our customers will come back and order subsequently. So we use these signals to forecast for the future, and then accordingly, stock the right set of medicines in our warehouses, right? And unlike fashion tech, where I was working before, where demand is substitutable, in the pharmacy world, in the health tech world, it is, you cannot substitute one medicine to the other unless there is a doctor's prescription, right? In these kind of use cases, we have an ensemble of demand forecasting models that run at the most granular skew geography level to predict demand, right? And there you don't need it to be explainable. It's okay if it is black box, right? And there are others where people would like to understand. There are other set of use cases where people would like to understand if we changed, say, our discounts by a percentage here or there, right? Or if we added this additional feature on the app, which makes it easier for people to search and find their medicines. There is obviously a change in conversion, right? And people would like to understand how does that actually break down. So if you were doing, say, X percentage a week ago and Y percentage a week later, then what are the factors that went into this X changing to a Y? And this is where people would, it's not enough if we just have a black box model. That's where we would definitely want to sort of break down and show the results, say, almost like in a waterfall chart, because that's something that everyone understands really well, that you were X and Y, and these were the factors that push the conversion up, and these were the factors that push the conversion down, and that's something everyone understands. Right. So there are both kind of use cases. I think it's very important for data scientists to define the problem really well upfront about what the business is actually expecting, or whoever is asking, right? So it could be product managers or business owners, business vertical owners, and the problem that they're really asking, you need to really define it well and understand what kind of a solution would work, whether it's a black box kind of solution, a gray box, or a white box.
Right. So very interesting, Srinivas. And coming back to my last question before we kind of open the Q&A floor to the audience. What does team structure look like, right? If you were to build a dream team for analytics today, what kind of skills would you have? Srinivas, let's start with you.
Well, we are always thinking about this problem, right? How do we build the dream team, right? I think just like data science is a very broad spectrum, right, of different skill sets. Some people are good at visualization, some people are good at exploratory analysis, some people are good at certain specific skills, some people are good at quality algorithms like linear regressions and k-means and things like that. Just like all your fingers are not equal, right? I think essentially you need a good variety of different skill sets in the team. But the one common thing that at least I look for in my team, or even when I hire for folks, is the passion for problem solving, right? So given any problem, right, how does are you first of all, are you kicked about solving that problem? Are you kicked about solving that problem in a using data? And what is the approach you generally take to solve that problem, right? The actual how do you define the problem? How do you solve this problem? How do you find how do you find formulate your hypothesis? So just the structured problem solving skills is the one common thing that I look for. Right. Apart from that, I think the attitude is something that is really important, right? A lot of folks are essentially they're not married to the problem statement, that they're more married to the technology involved or the algorithm and things like that.
Yeah. I think that the
Essentially some
the focus on technique is a too much of an issue. So Shantanu, taking cue from Srinivas, um, first answer the same question applies to you. What could be the right blend of skills which are needed for a data science function? That is one. Second is, how critical is the ability to speak to business, with the results which are coming. Although, Rajesh talked about, an NLG and NLP, making this slightly more easier, but the ability to translate analytics into a strategy still is a very big task. And for somebody like Airtel, where there are multiple stakeholders, multiple circles, multiple regions around the world, how critical is that as a?
So I'll actually just, answer the questions in reverse order. Ron actually answered it very, very well, which is, look, your current state of knowledge is good, but that's not sufficient condition to be successful in data sciences. Because, what in our field, things are changing so fast, unless you're continuously learning and very curious about how problems can be solved in a different manner, you won't succeed, right? So I look for three things. What problem are you going to solve? Do you really understand what the problem is, and not how business defines it, but going down to the level of where the rubber meets the road? After that, 95% of the people can answer the what question, and only about 5 or 10% can answer the next one, right? How and why do you solve it, right? Some problems, you should not have an attitude where you're essentially have a hammer and looking for a nail everywhere. If the problem can be solved with a pivot table, let the pivot table be the answer, and don't call it a data science, right? A lot of times, people will force fit a quote-unquote data science. My favorite saying is that most of the problems in the world can be solved with pivot table, and they're being force fit as data science problems, right? And then the third one is very important, which is what questions are you asking while solving the problem? That essentially tells you that whether you have one hypothesis that will go down one path, versus you have 6 different ways of solving the problem, and it will go sort of investigate each of them and sort of come up with the optimal solution. And remember, the optimal solution is not necessarily the one that will take you the longest to build a model. It can very often be a very elegant, short solution that solves 80% of the problem, but takes 20% of your time to go after the problem. Now, that's the sort of the reverse order. I answered what Ron said was right on the money, and I sort of added a few colors to it. The second thing, the communication with the business. I think data scientists underestimate the reason why most of the data science problems in the world are either not deployed or don't see a business value is because they don't think end-to-end. Right? Data scientists ought to start thinking about not only that I'll give you a problem, that solution that's so awesome, but does the organization have an ability to go implement that, right? I might give you a very elegant solution to, as I was talking about, our international roaming, targeting the international roaming passengers, which used to be a highly profitable business. But unless you're thinking about how those people would be reached, right? What are the levels of communication, when to target them, and the other aspects that our friends in marketing sort of think through. Right. So unless that shifts, and unless it's done in conjunction with both sides, right? It's not going to happen. The same network problem I talked about, right? Unless you go to a circle sphere. So when we are solving that network, right? In 1 week, I had to do Bangalore, Mumbai, Pune, Lucknow, Delhi, Kolkata, Agartala, Kolkata, Chennai, Hyderabad in about 10 days. The reason for that is the circle CEOs. Each of these are mini companies. Some of them are billion-dollar entities, right? They have certain ways of solving the problem, right? Unless your data science marries and sort of gets a middle ground, and if you're going to go say that here's my model, go follow it, trust me, what will happen is it won't be implemented. You'll come back cursing the rest of the organization, saying that they don't understand. And the other side of the organization saying this guy's in an ivory tower, nice guy, do research, let them write papers. We won't bother them. So it's the most critical skill set that a data scientist from day one would better learn.
Yeah. So Shantanu, thank you. Thank you to all my panelists. That kind of concludes our discussion for today. I'm going to now, open the floor for some, panelist questions. So the first question is for everyone. This is from an attendee, gentleman, Suresh Kumar. He's saying, is the industry engaging with government, because there is so much effort on the digital part for data capturing so that, we have reliability and sustainability going forward for analysis, right? And Shantanu, you touched upon this a little bit, that there is a lack of rural data But are you doing any stakeholder engagement with the state governments? Anyone, all three of you? Shantanu, let's start with you.
Anyone can take it. We are in some state government, as I was alluding to it. Some state governments are ahead of others, right?
Right.
So if you look at, so for example, Karnataka already has a decent data set at a taluka level, right? So going and having a conversation in Karnataka is easier. Telangana has done a wonderful job digitizing all the land records, most of the land records, if not all, and try to geocode some of them, right? Parts of Maharashtra.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. So I'm talking about different types of areas.
Right.
Parts of Maharashtra, Nashik, Pune, and all have actually good sort of what I call as smart city data. So at different level, I spend probably 10% of my time talking to the stakeholders. You need to realize that also again the same thing, right? You need to find out what problem they're trying to solve, what their use cases are, right? Just going and saying that you must capture, lateral of every single building in the state is a wonderful idea, but it's impractical, right? What's the use case, right? On the other hand, if you say that, look, I have a way of figuring out how to disburse in your rural development money by telling you which villages are relatively prosperous and where the biggest bang for the buck is, they will listen. At any given day, you can get at least a hearing from the senior level government officials, and they'll give you a hearing, right? So the key to there is that don't go with the sort of I have a solution for your problem and you need to listen to me. Flip it. Just say, hey, I think that there may be ways we can help you build a better way to disburse your government money and improve the livelihoods. Most people are willing to listen to you, and then sort of build it from a bit by bit, right? There's data.gov.in, which already has quite a bit of data. By the way, it's actually a wonderful source of data. Most people overlook it thinking that it's government data, so it's probably low quality. It isn't. Some of the quality of the data there is pretty good. So engagement, good conversation going on at all times.
Sure. Srinivas, has there been any effort, although you're more of a internet retailer, you probably have more data on your platform on buying behavior that you probably need from external. But any initiatives you?
Well, I think during the COVID times, there were some interesting partnerships with the state governments, both around some of the technology partnerships, also in terms of data, just understanding, for example, very simply put, where paracetamol sales are increasing, right? And that sort of gives you an indication of where the spread is happening, right? So those kind of very tactical, interesting partnerships did come up during COVID time. We are also helping the not just the government but the entire ecosystem build the right master data set, right? If you look at it, there is no one master data set of all approved drugs in the country. Actually, very surprising.
There's no drug index. Yes, there's no drug index.
There's no drug index. And that is something that we are painstakingly, actually, as we work with different stakeholders in the entire ecosystem, we are building that, and then that could be offered to any government agency as well as other stakeholders in the entire ecosystem who would want to leverage that. Because without that, actually, there is no way to communicate between any two entities, because it's sort of the language is missing, right? How do you tell somebody that you need a drug X when there is no unique identifier for the drug?
Yeah. It's a big problem. With some of our healthcare startups, we have seen that as a problem. So Rajesh, we just have time for one last question. Again, I'm going to throw it to the entire panel, but starting with Rajesh. We have a very interesting question from Rab Khan. There are so many APIs available which provide high quality training and validated data, right? Do you guys rely on any of those? Any advantages, disadvantages of that approach?
We actually, in order to make our models better, we do rely on external data sources. Like we pull in information about the weather, because weather has a big impact on what products will increase in demand, what products go in demand. Then we rely on plan to integrate events data. For example, right now maybe not so much, but it has taken a backseat. But for example, when IPL or some other events or other conferences happen, certain demand for certain services and products in certain areas go up or down. So we do rely on that. We rely on APIs, Google APIs, to get holiday level information for different geographies, different countries. like because it's nearly impossible to see all capture it from any other source. So with respect to a lot of the biggest disadvantage, I mean, I wouldn't say disadvantage, but there are certain challenges when it comes to doing that. First of all, like how do you rely on the data that is coming in? The reliability of the data is always in the question, but that depends on which vendors do you end up working with. The other part is sometimes the data is not reliable, like for example weather data. It's just because the measurement itself is unreliable, so there's nothing you can do about it. So there are ways that you have to do in, like your product has to be robust enough to be able to recognize that something is not right what we are using, and be able to deal with the quality of the data or the sparsity of the data that comes in whenever you're pulling in information from external sources.
Okay, thank you to my esteemed panel. Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you here on a Sunday afternoon. Very great insights with a lot of depth. Thanks once again, and it was lovely having you all here. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.